Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take your source material, really dig into it, and pull out the most interesting ideas, those unexpected connections, the kind of stuff that hopefully leaves you feeling a bit more informed and definitely more curious.
Yeah, we act as your guide, basically, sifting through what you've given us, helping you spot what's really key, maybe even finding some surprises hidden in there.
And today, we're diving into something that feels, well, incredibly personal, but also really relatable across time. Our source is this collection called Certain Personal Matters. Essays, observations, opinions from a very distinct author writing quite a while ago.
hmm Think of it like stepping into the mind of someone, living near the end of the 19th century. And he's reflecting on absolutely everything, from like shoelaces annoying him to, well, the potential end of the human race.
So our mission here is to unpack all these reflections. They can be pretty eccentric, often really insightful, sometimes genuinely funny. We want to pull out those nuggets that tell us something about human nature, society back then, and figure out what we can learn from his, let's say, unique perspective today.
Okay, so let's start with something that hits you right away reading these pieces. This deep feeling the author has that life itself is fundamentally a bother. Not just sometimes annoying, but kind of inherently troublesome.
Yeah, straight off the bat. He uses possessions to illustrate it, contrasting his Aunt Charlotte. She loved old, solid, uncomfortable things that lasted forever. Like a family curse, he calls it, with his own preference for new, cheap, comfortable stuff you can just replace.
And that little anecdote about the penny is great, isn't it? His aunt insisting the new pennies were bronze, not proper copper.
Right.
For him, bronze was a trashy pretender. It wasn't just about the metal. It was the whole attitude, permanence versus utility, perceived value versus actual comfort.
Which leads him to this idea that maybe possessions own us.
Exactly. Not the other way around. He has that slightly eerie image of his Aunt Adelaide's silk dresses still rustling cheerfully after she died. The things just persist, demanding space, outliving people.
And this feeling of bother, it just seeps into everything. He lists all these daily annoyances. The friction of washing, for instance, which he blames on Euphemia, seems like his wife or partner, maybe.
Uh-huh.
And just keeping track of the date and time, it feels like a burden to him.
Oh, and the sheer obligation of buying things. Boots, gloves, socks, getting suits made.
Yeah.
Even finding little things, string, envelopes, stamps. He paints this picture of a perfect world, a utopia, completely free from these specific nagging little tasks.
And he does tap into a sort of conventional idea there, doesn't he? Referencing Genesis, Carlyle, Thoreau,
Yeah.
suggesting that women, represented by Euphemia, are the ones pushing men to deal with things, keep up appearances.
Right, bothering them about it. His advice is pretty tongue-in-cheek.
Yeah.
Just neglect all that stuff now, save it for old age when you won't have the energy anyway. He finds the perfect symbol for this domestic bother in the coal scuttle. It becomes this whole little case study in, like, the frustration of trying to balance how things work with how they look.
Euphemia wants a nice, clean fireplace. Log fires don't work out. They go through different coal scuttles. There's the depraved japanned one that seems designed to make a mess,
Wow.
and the brass one that dents all the time.
What he's really getting at, I think, is that constant low-level battle just to exist in a space with objects that never quite behave. It's the entropy of everyday life seen through really exasperated eyes.
And maybe the absolute peak of this daily friction for him, dealing with a shopman. He describes it so vividly, the annoying manner, the questions feeling like an interrogation.
Probing into exactly what you need, what your tastes are, less help, more cross-examination.
And he feels this real pity for the myopic victims of these salesmen. He specifically mentions withered maiden ladies with their giddy, tottering, hectic bonnets.
Yeah, seeing them as literally short-sighted, easily persuaded into buying things that don't suit them because they lack a clear vision.
It pushes him to that extreme, almost darkly funny thought. Is killing a salesman murder?
It's the ultimate cry of frustration, isn't it?
Yeah.
Utterly fed up with the bothersome side of just interacting and buying things.
So what's the takeaway here? He's really highlighting how much energy goes into wrestling with the mundane, right? The objects, the chores, the necessary interactions.
Yeah, giving voice to that feeling we all get sometimes. I was just being slightly overwhelmed by the sheer amount of stuff and tasks, and it makes you wonder how much of that bother is still around, just in different forms. Are our apps and subscriptions and deliveries today's coal scuttle and shopman?
That sense of constant low-grade friction, it definitely still feels familiar. Okay, so moving on from inanimate objects, he turns that same sharp, often critical eye towards, well, people and social life.
Yes, and his thoughts of conversation are pretty pointed. He's really uncomfortable with that continuous polite chatter. He sees it as an abuse of language, almost.
Like people just doing it out of insecurity
Right.
to fill silence.
Exactly. Or to prove they aren't weird for being quiet. His ideal is the total opposite. Silent companionship with real friends. If the connection's deep, he thinks, the gabble ceases.
He even mentions his aunt stifling him as a kid
Yeah.
and his vision for future dinner party.
Oh, right. Everyone gets a phonograph under their chin to make the polite noises, freeing up the actual humans to think or, genuinely connect if they want to.
Wild. Then there's this fascinating character sketch, The Blade. He describes this social type. It's not just about what they do, it's their whole vibe, their code.
They have a very specific look. The tilted hat, the high collar, big bow tie.
And drinks are key identifiers, aren't they? Whiskey and soda for one crowd, beer for another, but ordered in this very specific, almost performative way, like 2 of swipes, ducky.
Yeah, and gambling is central too. The turf, nap, Baccarat-specific card games linked to a certain lifestyle back then, and their conversation style. It's meant to be sharp, cynical, full of epigrams.
Like those examples. Schoolmasters hang about the crops of knowledge like dead crows.
Right. Or on marriage. Marriage is the beginning of philosophy, and the end is do not marry. And there are strict rules. A blade would never collect stamps or keep pet rabbits, apparently.
One of the most vivid characters, though, has to be concerning a certain lady, this forceful woman in blue, Serge, and that truly bizarre incident at Gloucester Road Station.
Oh, yeah, where she apparently physically attacked him and his stuff umbrella hat with her family helping.
And he says it wasn't a one-off. She had a habit of attacking people getting onto buses. He uses these incredibly strong words for her. Atavism, like a throwback.
A Paleolithic squaw, really trying to paint her as something primal, almost prehistoric.
Then we meet Bagarrow. The author says he's well-meaning, but clearly can't stand him.
Right. His theory is Bagarrow has a disease in his ideals, trying too hard to be really nice or a true gentleman through these small, calculated gestures.
Like doing magic tricks, legerdemain, card tricks.
Yeah, or that story about ordering lemon squashes in a pub for someone he decided was a poor, fallen creature.
Yeah.
Feels engineered, not genuine kindness.
And the author's proposed cure for Bagarrow is intense.
Forcible trepanning. Drilling a hole in his skull. It's obviously dark hyperbole, but it shows just how deeply annoyed he is by this perceived phoniness.
But then, surprisingly, he has a positive view on quarreling.
Yeah, argues it's natural, healthy, even necessary. Especially for the educated classes who, he thinks, suppress their natural pugnacity too much.
Contrasting them with laborers who seem to argue freely and constantly.
He even talks about the art of quarreling, finding a worthy opponent, having principles about it. And he kind of misses the good old days of thumb biting as a more direct form of conflict.
He also briefly mentions in A Literary Household how writers can view people, even friends like Euphemia with her manuscript, as just material.
Like slave dealers sizing people up for their stories.
So, looking at all these character sketches and social bits, what's the pattern? He's clearly a sharp observer, maybe a bit misanthropic.
Definitely. He's highlighting that gap between real connection and forced politeness, the way people perform certain roles. And maybe, with Curling, he's arguing for the value of authentic, even difficult, interaction over just bottling things up. Do you recognize these types today? Maybe wearing different clothes? How do you deal with people whose motives feel off or navigate those necessary but tricky conversations?
It really does make you think about those enduring human types. Okay, let's shift gears now to his thoughts on writing itself and ideas, because his takes here are just as sharp and unconventional.
Absolutely. He kicks off with the literary regimen, and it's deliberately absurd advice, isn't it? The fundamental secret of literary art, he says, is linked directly to your digestion.
Right. To be a great writer, first you have to ruin your stomach. His methods. Live in cheap digs, or maybe even better, marry someone who's a terrible cook.
And the dietary plans are hilarious. Specific foods for specific styles, currant buns for lurid stories, soda water and biscuits for humor.
Boiled water and veg for florid prose, tea and biscuits for detective stuff, plain rice and toast for social science. He even mocks the idea with Jabber's food for authors, suggesting it probably contains poison.
Beyond food, there's the actual tool.
Mm-hmm.
On essay writing, the fundamental secret becomes the pen itself, specifically the quill.
He loves its informality, the way it suggests things, even the sounds it makes, the scratching, dipping.
He dismisses steel nibs, stylographs, and absolutely hates the typewriter for essay writing. Too rigid. Plus, he worries it takes work from human typists. It's all about that tactile, almost organic feel for him.
Then there's his really provocative theory of quotation. He argues the nobler method isn't to quote properly at all. He sees that as just plugging a leak, admitting you couldn't say it yourself.
No, the only way that's artistic, kindly, and honest, according to him, is plagiary. Basically, like, just integrate the idea seamlessly.
He uses that anecdote about Euphemia's aunt assuming novel mottos were written for the book as proof that people naturally expect integration, not fiddly attribution. It's a bit of a satirical poke at academic rules.
Then he dives into swearing with the Book of Curses, alongside his friend Professor Gargoyle. They notice traditional cursing is declining.
And his theory's fascinating. Women traditionally set the boundaries for bad words. Now they're starting to use them, so men will abandon them, and eventually swearing might just disappear.
He tells that funny story about using really elaborate foreign curses he learned in Aleppo to completely silence some working men on a train. They were just bewildered.
He also misses what he calls grace swearing, things like odds fish or odds bodkins, polite ways to add emphasis without actually swearing. A lost art, he thinks.
And this connects to his idea that swearing is nature's outlet, a way to let off steam, maybe prevent actual violence, like animals growling instead of fighting.
He also takes on the language of flowers, dismissing all that sentimental coded meaning stuff.
Right. Flowers are just advertisements for bees, he argues. And he offers his own, much more cynical interpretations. The daisy is an artistic deception. The violet is artful, maybe a young widow.
He suggests the agave, which only blooms once in like 50 years. That's the real symbol of modesty. Hilarious.
Reflecting on his own writing in the Pose novel, he talks about burning his first attempt because it was just an exaggerated version of himself.
Where?
He thinks lots of young writers create these tadpole novels all about them.
And he contrasts these Pose writers with true artists, who he calls white windows upon the truth, transparent conduits for reality, not filters for their own ego.
He even mentions the sheer difficulty of writing in the Book of Essays Dedicatory, imagining a book that's just blank pages and dedications because the content was so hard. And his call for freedom of spelling, seeing rigid spelling rules as tyrannical, linked to morality somehow, and wanting anarchy in spelling.
So across all these pieces about writing and ideas, you see him constantly pushing back against conventions, don't you? How writers should eat, what tools they use, how to cite, what words are okay, what flowers mean.
Exactly. He's challenging arbitrary rules, sentimental fluff, arguing for authenticity, even if it's messy or unconventional. It makes you think, what conventions do we just blindly accept in how we create or communicate? What might happen if we push back a bit?
It's a good reminder that those rules aren't always set in stone. Okay, finally, let's look at how the author observes the wider world and how that leads him to some pretty speculative, sometimes even bleak thoughts about the future.
He has that wonderfully detailed observation on schooling and the phases of Mr. Sansom, describing the schoolmaster's day.
Sharp in the morning, but after dinner, getting sleepier and sleepier, then suddenly jerking awake.
Like a fisherman setting the hook to catch kids misbehaving. Great image.
Then there's house hunting as an outdoor amusement, contrasting the grim task of finding a place you need with the fun of just looking at houses for sport.
And the feeling of empty houses, seeing ghosts in wallpaper stains, smelling quarrels on a loose door handle.
He tells that story about Hillcrest, this huge house with incredibly low rent, like 40 pounds a year, and they couldn't figure out why, so they made up dark theories about it.
Yeah, and he includes that lovely detail of playing umbrella cricket in the kitchen during a storm and Euphemia standing on the dresser like it was her dollhouse.
He takes us on these nature walks in The Amateur Nature Lover, appreciating autumn colors but then bumping into weird things, a golfer spreading fungus spores.
And that bizarre unsolved mystery of the 11 old boots, found singly, not in pairs, in pretty spots. The tramp theory doesn't quite work, and he notes how man-made stuff, like cinder paths and barbed wire, intrudes on nature.
His winter trip, excursion to Epping Forest, is just a catalog of misery, isn't it? Dreary weather, sinister beech trees in the rain, mud.
So much mud. And then missing the train home, only to boast later about what a lovely day they had. It really shows how we rewrite our experiences.
The description of the missing museum, the Parks Museum, is particularly strange. So hard to find.
And inside, just this random collection of baffling stuff. Germicides, a model prison, wax vegetables, liver flukes, snuff. all gathering dust.
Mm.
Hardly any visitors. He even mentions seeing his own dust print on something.
Then he shifts focus, looking at the incredibly small through a microscope with his friend the dabbler, describing all that weird, active, microscopic life.
Things shaped like shortbread, Euglena viridis, those little green guys, transparent cyclops, gliding diatoms.
And this leads him to some deep thoughts, like the amoeba's potential immortality, imagining it crawling through Silurian seas millions of years ago.
Right, long before fish, let alone us. It really puts our own brief existence into perspective, doesn't it?
And from the tiny to the vast and long term, his incidental thoughts on a bald head. Sees bald heads in a lecture, challenges natural selection, what's the advantage of losing hair? He sees humans patching up decay with artificial things like clothes and wigs.
And he shares that professor's vision of future humans. Basically, giant brains on shriveled bodies. Strange, non-animal faces, maybe fed by liquid immersion. It's a pretty chilling thought experiment about where evolution driven purely by intelligence might go.
Which connects directly to the really sobering ideas in The Extinction of Man. He calls out human arrogance. We find it almost impossible to imagine our own end.
Yeah, and he lays out possibilities. New predators from the sea, maybe crabs, maybe octopuses invading land, the threat of ants, or just new diseases wiping us out.
And looking up the stars in their courses, he sees the night sky not as a permanent fixture, but a fragile window, a mere accident that lets us glimpse infinite space. He wonders how it would change if that view, normally hidden by blue sky, was suddenly clear to everyone all the time.
He wraps up this section with concerning chess, describing it as a game that annihilates a man, slaps natural selection because it rewards intense focus over adaptability, brings no joy, only remorse.
The lowest deeps of remorse, and it can just cling to you, consume you. It's a really dark view of this purely intellectual battle.
What's amazing throughout this whole section is how his observations, whether it's a schoolmaster napping, an empty house, random boots, or microscopic life, become launch pads for these huge philosophical leaps about our future, our place in the cosmos.
He doesn't just see things, he connects, questions, imagines. It really pushes you to think. How do our own small, everyday observations shape our bigger picture views? What strange or significant things are we maybe missing just outside our normal focus?
Wow, that was quite a tour through this author's mind, wasn't it? We went from the bother of finding stamps and dealing with coal scuttles all the way to contemplating human extinction and the potential immortality of amoebas.
Yeah, quite the range. And what these certain personal matters really show is the value in looking closely at everything, the mundane, the weird, the vast, through your own specific lens. Finding those unexpected insights in everyday friction, social quirks, creative challenges, and just observing the world.
This deep dive was put together just for you, based on the sources you provided. Hopefully it's giving you a shortcut to some of the most interesting bits and pieces within.
So here's a final thought for you to take away from all this. Consider how much of the human bother, the daily frustrations, the social anxieties, the concerns about stuff and appearances, we talked about how much of that might look from that huge evolutionary or cosmic viewpoint the author hints at. Well, like just fleeting quirks of our species.
Quirks of a species that might one day vanish or morph into something completely different, like those microscopic creatures or like the obsolete objects and forgotten rules of the past. What does taking that massive step back, what does that do to our sense of what really matters right here, right now?
Something to think about.